Office of Partnerships for having us today. So as Taryn mentioned, Intel released a report in early January focused on the global internet gap facing women in developing countries. And before I get into the details of the report, I want to just start by telling you a story and introducing you to this woman, Beatrice, who's from Uganda. And Beatrice watched painfully as 7 of her brothers and 2 of her sisters died of HIV. And she, as a result of that, she was at risk of losing her land. And so Beatrice used to walk 4 kilometers each way to an internet cafe to access the internet, and she used that internet cafe to participate in an online community of women called World Pulse. And there she was able to share her story. And when we talked to Beatrice, she said, you know, I used to be shy, and now with World Pulse, I just want to tell my story to whoever will listen. And through World Pulse, you know, she learned about citizen journalism, but more importantly, she built this network and community of women to engage with. And she told us, you know, after she began telling her story, the response was tremendous. She got support, she got information, she got this feeling that she was not alone. And she said, you know, now I feel like I have this army of women behind me, supporting me. And with that army of women, Beatrice was able to save her land. I also want to introduce you to Sakina, and she represents one of the 2,200 women that we surveyed in our Women in the Web report. And she, like many others, actually 1 in 5 women in India and Egypt that we surveyed told us that it was inappropriate to use the internet, and that if they did use the internet, their families would not approve. And she just, you know, that whole sense of cultural norms we found was a barrier to access and to use of the internet. So on one hand, Beatrice illustrates the struggles to get access to information and the benefits that can be derived once you do obtain that access. And then you have Sakina, who represents the many women and men around the world who don't have access to information and who actually don't see the opportunity that can come from accessing information. And so their stories illustrate that there's a serious knowledge gap or skills divide between those who can create, manage, process information and those who are impaired in that process. And a recent UNESCO report showed that there was a positive correlation between access to knowledge and information and power, profit, and wealth. And so, you know, as a result of this knowledge gap, there is a serious difference in access to skills. It's quite unequal. And this means lost opportunities for education, for achievement, as well as for social and economic development. So that used to be blue on the bottom. So you know, what motivated Intel to get involved in this? And so, you know, we know that the internet has enormous potential to transform lives, and it has transformed the lives of billions of people. But women and girls are being left behind, and they don't have equitable access to the internet and all of the benefits that come from that access. And so we really wanted to better understand at a global level what is that gap in access, and try to aggregate some of the numbers at a global level, particularly for developing countries. And in order to do that, we did 2,200 surveys in 4 countries, in India, Egypt, Uganda, and Mexico. And we collaborated with the State Department, with UN Women, as well as with World Pulse in this, and they were fabulous collaborators. And so from a private sector perspective, this is not, and we've heard earlier today, this makes business sense. How can we think about creating business value, creating social value, or shared value by bridging something like the internet gap? And I'll talk more about what are some of the outcomes at a macroeconomic level as well as at a market opportunity level. So just to give you some context, there's 2.4 billion internet users globally, and that access to that is very unequally dispersed. So to give you some context, if you look at India, India has 11% internet penetration. Somewhere like Uganda has 13% internet penetration. And then at the opposite extreme, you have somewhere like Iceland, which has 97% internet penetration. So that picture globally is quite uneven. And for women, that unevenness is even greater. So what our research found was that globally, 23% fewer women than men are online. And that is a gap of 200 million women. And in places like sub-Saharan Africa, that number grows to almost 45% fewer women than men who are online. So it's quite significant. So if there's no concerted effort and internet usage continues at the rate it's going today, that gap is going to grow. And so it will grow from 200 million women today to 350 million women in 3 years. And so our report was very interested in what is that gap, what are some of the challenges women face in accessing the internet, but what can we do about it? What do we need to do about it? So let me give you a sense of what are some of the factors that are keeping women offline. So we looked at this from both an individual level as well as at the macro level. So from an individual level, we found challenges around things like awareness. What is the internet? And ability. How do I use it? And we found that a quarter of the women who were non-users in our survey simply said, I don't see any relevance to using the internet. I don't know what the purpose of it is. And then 40% of the women who are not online said a lack of familiarity was the reason that they weren't using it. They just simply didn't know what do you do and how do you do it. At a macro level, we found the key things that we found were affordability and accessibility were key challenges that kept women offline. So what happens when they do get online? We found at an individual level that there were immense amounts of increases in self-esteem, in confidence, in opportunities, social, economic opportunities, educational opportunities, as well as a feeling of being part of a network, which is an incredible feeling like you could see from the story of Beatrice. That idea that you are part of a community that goes beyond your localized area. And then at a macroeconomic level, we found benefits in terms of GDP and market opportunity, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the research, outlines these challenges, outlines these barriers, and what can happen, but it also has a call to action. And that, to me, is the most critical part of what we have put out there. And the call to action is to double the number of women online within the next 3 years, which is a conservative yet, potentially achievable action. And that would make the situation go from 20% of women online in developing countries to 40% of women online in 3 years. And so there are tremendous benefits that could result if we doubled the number of women online in 3 years. So at an individual level, our research showed 45% of women from our survey said that using the internet, they could search for jobs and apply for jobs. 30% used it to earn additional income. And this one was particularly interesting to me, was that 85% of the women said that the internet provided them with more freedom. And it's something that I use every day for various purposes and don't think about it from that lens. And from our surveys of these 2,200 women, that came out as a key component. And then from a from the market opportunity, from that shared value perspective, why should businesses care? If you want to just think about it purely from the numbers perspective, doubling the number of women online could create this market opportunity of up to $70 billion in data and market plans from the technology perspective. And from a GDP perspective, as was mentioned earlier, it creates an opportunity between $13 and $18 billion annually across 144 countries. So there's clear benefits. So in order to do this, it requires more than just one actor. It requires a multiple stakeholder effort. And we've had many discussions to date just in the last month with the UN, with the World Bank. It's been discussed with the Clinton Global Initiative, with USAID, just all these groups interested in what can we do to double that number. And it requires collaboration among every sector in order to make the internet affordable, accessible, safe, and useful for women. So when you see, when I was thinking about this woman, Sakina, you can think about this as very daunting disparities. But you can also see it as a big opportunity. And in terms of this moment right now on the planet, it's an unparalleled moment of rapid social innovation, rapid technological innovation, and social change. And so the world is poised to start equalizing the playing field. And so I encourage you to join us. And I would love to talk to each of you about what we could do collaboratively to double the number of women online. And as has been mentioned earlier, it not only would benefit a woman, but also her family as well as her society. So I want to ask our panelists to come out, wherever they are. And so our report sets some context. The report sets some context for our panel today, which is focused on workforce readiness and closing the skills gap. And to give you some context, 1 young person in 8 across the globe is looking for work. So the skills gap is an urgent thing that we need to address. And the well-being and prosperity of young people really depends on skills training and education. And just a couple of facts to lay out some context. By 2020, the global economy will witness 40 million fewer workers with tertiary education than the expected demand. And interestingly, there will be a surplus of as many as 95 million low-skill workers that actually don't have the skills necessary to compete and be competitive and achieve the goals that are necessary in long-term ambitions. So our panelists today have an incredible set of expertise and experience in this space in addressing issues around workforce readiness and in closing the skills gap. And what's exciting about this panel, it's a diversity of perspective, not just from an international perspective, but here in the US and thinking about how this works right here. So we have Carolyn Berkowitz, who is the Managing Vice President in Community Affairs and President of Capital One Foundation. Her work is focused on supporting economic opportunity and education and financial literacy. We have Ana Maria Chávez, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Girl Scouts, and what I found wonderful was a lifetime member of the Girl Scouts. And she's been recognized as a top 100 woman of leader in STEM. And then third, we have Marga Fripp, who is the founder and president of Empowered Women International. And she's an award-winning social entrepreneur and international expert on entrepreneurship. So we're thrilled to have you all together, and I hope it will be a lively debate and discussion. And I've asked each of the speakers to use the power of storytelling to help communicate the work their organization is doing to close the skills gap. So can we start with Carolyn?
Sure. It's truly an honor to be here. The Ford Foundation, and in partnership with the UN, it's very inspiring to me as I look just at the nouns and that list on the wall. I can think of no better place to be having this conversation. I'm also thrilled to be here with my friends from the Business Civic Leadership Center, on whose advisory board I sit, and to share this panel with grantee partners of Capital One's, either at the local or the national level. I believe, and Capital One believes, that women and girls empowerment and closing that gender gap really can have an outsized impact on our growing economy. And I'm going to talk today mostly about domestic investments and how that happens in the US, as that's where our expertise is. I'm reminded of a colleague from the Nike Foundation, and whose program focuses on girls and starts with 13-year-old girls and expands out from there. And what they have learned is that by focusing on education, health, and training of 13-year-old girls, it absolutely changes the world. So literally, the impact on world health through AIDS, the impact on international security, the impact on the world economy literally does change by making that investment. And that is just a pretty powerful motivator for our company, who is engaged in financial services, to invest in. And so we do know that when it comes to the progress that we have made around women's issues here in the US, there are some great strides, but we also know that there are lots of things still left on the agenda to fix. And so what I'll talk about today is how Capital One works to address, through its corporate social responsibility, largely philanthropy, HR, supplier diversity, products and services, really how to bridge that gap. So what do we know about what is good that has happened in the US recently? There are now 20 female CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies, and in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, it's particularly interesting. The defense contracting industry, which is a huge employer in Washington, now has just in the last year, has instilled 4 women CEOs of the largest defense contracting companies. So it is fascinating to watch that industry in Washington, D.C., which is economic engine, just change before our very eyes in less than 12 months. Women are responsible for starting 2 out of 5 small businesses, and in America right now, 56% of undergrads are women. And so I think we're starting to see that seismic shift over time, and it will be interesting to watch what that looks like in 4 years and 8 years and 12 years. 51% of personal wealth is held by women, and from 1970 to 2007, the salary increase for women here in the US was 44%, while the salary increase for men at that same period of time was 6%. So I think there are some really strong gains, and we're starting to see how that is impacting teenage girls and preteen girls as they, and our friends will talk more about that, but as they begin to have that strong social capital. I will tell you a story about my own daughter, my own just past teenage girl. My husband works in the food industry, and so he doesn't wear a tie to work on a regular basis, and I, suit up most days. And my daughter now is 22, but when she was 4, my husband got a traffic ticket and had to go to traffic court one morning. I was traveling on business, and so my husband comes downstairs in a suit and tie and puts Leslie in the car there, to go to daycare. And she said, "Daddy, why are you so dressed up?" And he said, "Well, I have a meeting." He didn't want to tell her he was going to traffic court. And my 4-year-old, hands on hips, went, "And since when do boys go to meetings?" And that is, I think, indicative of that social capital and what I hope we will see worldwide someday. But that outlook is less rosy, as we know. And so In America in 2010, women are 29% more likely to be poor than men. And women with a high school diploma or less are significantly more likely to live in poverty than men in the same circumstances. In Washington, D.C., there are 200,000 women and girls that live in poverty. And that it was a double-digit increase over the previous year. And we heard a lot about the international statistics, but a staggering 70% of the world's poor are women. And so we have some work to do. And I'm excited to tell you how Capital One is doing some of that work, and excited to share in the conversation about how nonprofits are doing that work. I'll just give a little preview, primarily by investing for us in what we call 3 E's, so education, entrepreneurship, and economic development. And so those are things that I'll talk about as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Anna Maria, do you want to give us a sense?
Congratulations. You guys are getting a lot of work done. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for moderating this morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Before I start my remarks, show of hands, how many of you were members of Girl Scouts? Okay, so for our righteous brothers in the room, how many of your wives, daughters, mothers, aunts, cousins were Girl Scouts? How many of you buy Girl Scout cookies? Okay, there you go. So I can say that we're all involved in Girl Scouting one way or another. I am very honored to be the 19th CEO of Girl Scouts of the USA in 100 years. It's an amazing organization. We turned 100. Last year we turned 101 next week. And we're very excited to really talk about this amazing organization that's actually built the leadership pipeline in this country for women. You know, a lot of people see our brand, they smile. They think of crafts sometimes, they think of camping, they think of cookies. But we want you to think premier leadership organization for girls, because really we have been creating a silent green army for 100 years. And I will tell you how silent it is. They're everywhere and you don't know it. So the statistics that you just went over this morning actually talk about our history. So when you talk about Congress, you talk about the Senate. In the recent election that we just had, 70% of women serving in the U.S. Senate are Girl Scout alum. 54% of the women serving in the U.S. House of Representatives are Girl Scout alum. Of the current cabinet for the president, and we'll take Hillary when she was Secretary of State, so all 3 prior Secretaries of State, Hillary Clinton, Condoleezza Rice, and Madeleine Albright, all Girl Scout alum. Janet Napolitano, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary, Girl Scout till she was 18, my former boss, still sings her Girl Scout camp songs. Kathleen Sebelius, head of HHS, a Girl Scout. Almost every single woman that's flown in space, Girl Scouts. 70% of women business owners in the country, Girl Scouts. 59 million women in the United States wore the sash one time in her life. So that's approximately 1 in 2 American women, which you could see was clearly in this audience shown today. So why do I tell you about those statistics? It's because it has been the model of really getting girls engaged in education and thinking about leadership in a very different way while they're having fun with other girls. I wanted just to share a story as we get started and you get into questions, a story about Girl Scouts and how it's had impact for this country. So there was a young girl that was adopted from China when she was 3 years old. Her name was Danielle, Danielle. And when they adopted her, she didn't have fingers on one hand. So like any parents that love their child, they were trying to figure out a way of helping their daughter. So what did they do? They got online and they Googled it or Yahoo'd it. And they found all sorts of resources. And when they were trying to figure out how to do this, many facilities and doctors wouldn't fit her for a prosthetic hand because she was growing so rapidly. And it was very expensive. But she found this group that was willing to help her. And this group of individuals went out and talked to doctors, went to research labs, medical labs, prosthetic companies, and they ultimately designed a prosthetic hand. It went on to win the X Prize, and it's currently, their contraption, their hand for Danielle is actually called Bob 1, and they're waiting for a patent to be approved for it. They just returned from Rio de Janeiro at the G20 summit talking about technology, STEM, how important it is here in the United States as a workforce initiative. That group was a Girl Scout troop called the Flying Monkeys from Ames, Iowa, middle school girls. Now, I tell you that story because a lot of people don't realize that girls across the country are making a stand for their education and understanding, even at the age of 13, that they have to figure out a way to ensure they're getting the resources they need to succeed as adults, which means STEM for them, science, technology, engineering, math, will be not the niche market, it will be the market. And so Girl Scouts, using their organization of 112 local councils across the country, so we're in every zip code in this country and we're in 92 countries in the world, we're going to use that network to support more girls as they achieve great things. So I'll end there because I want you to have an opportunity to share with the audience, but I look forward to the dialogue today.
Thank you. So Marga, do you want to share your story?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you both are amazing, and thank you so much to everyone for being here. I guess empowered, well, I should say, I wish I were a Girl Scout. I was not, and I'll tell you why. This is so exciting. I grew up in Romania, so you guys need to be there. You know, Empowered Women International is one of those most amazing organizations that you meet once in your lifetime and you will never want to leave it. And it is because it has that power of transformation, the girl kind of power that really touches you in a very important time in your lifetime. We work particularly with immigrant, refugee, and low-income women, creative, talented, entrepreneurial, artistically engage in a community and help them monetize their talents, skills, creative abilities, and cultural heritage. And this is really powerful because we're talking about integrating communities and empowering women and building those local economies and creating more green economies and giving a chance to our kids to thrive and to our neighborhoods to be stable and secure and safe. Yet our local economies are not really strong. So I think this is kind of where we come in. We look at what do those communities have to offer, and women at the centers of those communities, what can they contribute to the success of this nation? And sure enough, I'm looking at the women that we work with. About 80% of the women coming to Empowered Women International, although they make under $20,000 when they come to us, they're highly educated in their country. They speak a couple of languages, and most of them, we have about 80% of them having an associate degree, and then 34% of them having a graduate degree. Then you wonder, why are they paid so less? Access to opportunity. It is very, very difficult to integrate. So entrepreneurship makes a very good sense to those women. It's hard to enter in corporate America when you just came from another country. It's very hard to navigate a system. So what are you going to do? You look internally at your talents, your skills, your abilities, and you are trying to invest those in your community to build successful businesses. I think what makes us really interesting and unique is the fact that we use creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship to invest in the immigrant women, and then with that power, women invest back in their children, in their communities, they give back in their communities. We looked at the impact, the multiplier effect, and we've seen that about 80% of the women graduating from our Entrepreneur Training for Success are highly engaged back into their neighborhoods, into the schools. They teach women ex-offenders. They teach children in public school. 90% of those women give percent of their business sales to other organizations, to other charities, and about 60% of them contribute remittances in their countries. So it is just really extraordinary to see what a little cash in hand for a woman can do, not at a micro level, but at a global level. And the multiplier effect in that sense, I think, is just extraordinary. And let me tell you how I came to actually love empowering women through entrepreneurship. I came to the United States right after September the 11th, literally 7 days after September the 11th, and everything was was completely different for me. I was a broadcast journalist, a women's rights activist. I ran a very successful women's organization in my country. I did have a little glitch. I didn't speak English. A big glitch, right? And immediately I was labeled immigrant. I also had a personal difficult journey. We came to the United States to save the son of my life who had a stroke when he was 2 days old. So we just came in a very, very difficult time. But who immigrates or who leaves a country in a good time, right? So when we arrived here, everything was absolutely difficult to understand, to digest, and I was stuck. And I am not a woman that didn't know who she was. I was very established. I had very strong roots, yet suddenly, within no more than 2 days, I was disempowered. And I realized very quickly that if I, with all that I had been and I have done, feel this way, how would other women feel? How do they navigate? I also had married a former Peace Corps volunteer, so I have an American citizen. So I had some sort of stability in my life. I had some sort of roadmap. But 90% of the women immigrating to this country have no roadmap. There's no network of support. There is no roof above their head. And most of them are forced to reinvent themselves. And you know what? I started reading a lot of books on see how long does it take to reinvent yourself and how are you going to integrate and navigate. Then 8 to 12 years. And I'm thinking, 8 to 12 years? Oh my gosh. I have passed legislation in my country in 4 years. I don't have 8 years to wait to feel home. And so I immediately looked outside my neighborhood and I wanted to be part of something greater than me. My isolation, immediately I realized it was not only my story, it was the story of a lot of women that I was seeing in my communities, walking with little babies and cleaning homes. So I joined a community college to learn English. I have to tell you, in a couple of months, I was able to be fluent, and that has changed everything for me. And while I was in this community college, I met this this is where my transformation happened. I was exposed to this huge class English as a speaking language community, about 90 people, the majority were women. And they were all there, not because they were not educated, they were all there because they did not have means to communicate or be effective in their communication. But they were musicians, dancers, painters, established writers in their country. But here in the United States, they were all paid $6 an hour, doing menial job, and there was no way out. Those women were disempowered, lost hope, there was no sense of opportunity. So Empowered Women International was created as an answer to this crisis of integration. I think before talking about economic empowerment, perhaps is that sense of internal, emotional empowerment. You've got to believe that you can do something that is worth your life on this earth. And it has to come from within. And I think entrepreneurship kind of fits in right within this because we all have a calling and we all have skills and abilities and experiences that could be monetized. And so setting up an entrepreneurship program, we now have a year-long entrepreneur incubator with 2 programs, a 3 months intense mentoring and entrepreneurship launching your business and 9 months of building your business as women come out of the program. We provide access to a full set of mentors from marketing to financial empowerment to legal advice, to product design and development, and then as we complete this process, they need to bring product and service to the market, and we facilitate access to the marketplace. We travel with a variety of our programs and marketplace across the region in various communities. We link women up in the community. And somebody was asking me the other day, so what do you think is the greatest thing that your program does that perhaps other programs don't? I don't know exactly what other programs don't do. But I have to tell you, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, mentoring, all are great. I think what's missing most of the time, it's a community of support. It's that sense of expanded network. We all at Empowered Women International feel home. And I really mean this. And we listen, and we spend time listening to each other. And when things don't go the way perhaps the client wanted, we change course. And we do it because we actively listen. And so I think just creating businesses and letting them hope that they will thrive is not the answer, but creating a support network for those entrepreneurs to thrive and bring their families in and bring their neighborhoods in. 50% of the women coming into our programs come from referrals, and they're usually extended networks of the previous graduates. So it is truly a women for women, women empowering women organization with huge mentoring program. We do a lot of one-on-one mentoring, and we have excellent partnerships with Capital One that does not only fund our work, but actually brings bankers into the game of entrepreneurship. And when we talk about a small artisan that makes a beautiful necklace, which is hard to sometimes turn into a business, you have a banker that comes with a different perspective, and that changes the equation. And that sense of empowerment happens within a couple of minutes, and then it's just a matter of supporting that woman on her journey through capital access to market that we open, and constant encouragement. So,
well, thank you. I mean, each of you have clearly defined strategies that you have and tremendous benefits and outcomes. But one of the things that I always want to know is, what are some of the key challenges that you face in getting to those outcomes? And so maybe we can start with you, Anna Maria.
Sure. Well, for us, it's just the adult support system. I think girls really want an opportunity to do what they want to do in the United States, but we currently only actually serve 8% of the girls in the United States and girls living abroad. So who is serving the other 92%? And we've clearly shown over 100 years that we have the model and the leadership experience that really helps girls succeed. So for us, it's engaging the community, engaging adults around supporting these girls. It's also, I believe, a very strong economic imperative to support these girls. And we all know the growing demographic in this country. They kind of look like me. They're Hispanic, they're Latina girls. First, they are either born outside this country and coming, or now they're second generation. And they may not have the cultural ties to this organization that has placed women in the pipeline for 100 years. So what does that mean for you? Why, should we care if Girl Scouts continues into the next 100 years? It's because there's going to be a whole sector of girls who may not have a family connection or cultural tie to our organization. So they are not going to get access if we don't reach them in creative ways to get them into that pipeline. So for us, it's that. In addition to that, there's something going on when it comes to the disparity between investing in boys and investing in girls. Now, full admission here. I am a mother of an 11-year-old son, Michael Christopher. He's going to get all the advantages I can possibly get for him. But I also work for 2.3 million girls. And what I see when I go out and I talk about girl issues, a lot of times people, oh, nice Girl Scout, so nice. And when I say, well, nice is great, but we're building the workforce for this country, they're like, well, how are you going to do that? Do girls want to work in certain industries? And I'm just going to give you a comparison, apples to apples. So Boy Scouts, okay? They were founded about 3 years before the Girl Scouts. We're two separate organizations, but it's the other scouting organization in the United States. For those of you who, I want to take a guess. Okay, in 2010, how much do you think Boy Scouts raised from adults to support boys in this country? If you had a guess. Any Boy Scouts in the audience? How much? Very generous, 56 million. Yes. And I will tell you that Boy Scouts told us they were very gracious. They invited us to their headquarters. The former CEO sat us down with his development team and said, this is how we fundraise for boys. It was an incredible learning lesson for us. When they asked us, well, how much do you raise? They said 56 million. How much do you think we raise on an annual basis for girls? Not cookie money, but adults writing checks to support local Girl Scout councils in this country.
20 million.
4 million. And if you go city by city and just ask the question, so we're mostly funded by, again, organizations at the local level. So if you ask corporations, when you're investing in organizations, is there parity? Just ask that simple question. Look down, when you look at corporations or foundations, or even government, and you look to see the youth organizations that they're funding, look to see if there's parity. Now, I'm not saying that organizations don't want to. It's just we've never asked. Because I will tell you, women sometimes have a hard time asking for money. They do.
All the time.
Right? All the time. It's a cultural thing. We're kind of embarrassed. Right? It's like, ooh, that's kind of a rude thing to ask for, money, you know? And for Girl Scouts, because we're always serving and giving, we never sit back and think, are we building the capacity to support these girls in this country? So we're going to change that because the girls have told us they're done self-financing their leadership journey by cookies. And they've been doing it. And believe me, I don't get a penny of the cookies. It never comes here to New York. It stays locally because those girls take that revenue and reinvest it back in their local communities. And they're funding almost every single nonprofit and city government in the United States. Think about it. They're community service projects. They're funding the local animal shelters, domestic violence shelters, the senior homes, the congregate meal sites, the city parks, libraries, the list goes on. So for us, the major barrier right now is getting individuals globally to think about investing in girls, and that it's going to be a great return on investment.
Okay, Carolyn, can you kind of elaborate from your perspective?
So I think, the word gap is the issue. So the gender gap, and you have done a beautiful job of describing it, but the poverty gap between men and women here is higher than in any other Western industrialized country. And I think the income gap in general, so between haves and have-nots, is getting wider and wider and wider. And so, we read in the paper just yesterday all these statistics about how much stronger the economy is and how well corporations are doing and how personal wealth is increasing. And at the same time, we know it is just widening that gap. So addressing that gap it's daunting. There is a lot for us to do. And you have eloquently both described stories. So, there are many ways to do it. We do it through education, especially in urban environments and in rural poor environments. There are huge dropout factories where there's dropout rates of, 60% in some schools versus, less than 10%, probably less than 5% in my kids' school. So it turns out that 1 in 4 American kids are dropping out of school, but it's huge in some areas. So it is difficult to invest in education from a gender lens, although there are opportunities through things like Girl Scouts to do that, and we do. But we lift all boats when we invest in high school graduation and in college access. So in a school here in New York that is run by Outward Bound called Wheels, we're actually investing in college access and in a very holistic way, high school graduation and college access. And we built a college readiness room so kids can, get engaged and look up where they want to go to school and dream and think about that. We do financial education with those kids, and we do workforce development with those kids. And that group, at the end of every school year, the seniors actually walk in a parade, march to the post office with their college applications in hand, and literally drop them, with the mayor, undersecretary of education here in New York, the assistant mayor, and literally, drop those envelopes into the mailbox. When we invest in workforce development, there are a number of programs that are exclusively for women, but again, not all of them. So how do you target women within a workforce development program? The Capital One Foundation has actually just developed a fund, the Human Capital Investment Fund, a $4 million fund over the next several years, where we are investing in sector-specific workforce development strategies. So how is it that we train potential workers for industries where we know that there are jobs? And so one thing that we are working on, an organization here in New York, is called NEW, the Non-Traditional Employment for Women organization. And they have traditionally trained women for construction jobs, and our investment now will go to training women for transportation jobs as well, or facilities management jobs. So just expanding those industries that are traditionally male-dominated that now could be for women, or in an organization that is not gender-specific, like Perscalis, which is also here in New York, a workforce development program. Women are very much underrepresented in IT, and so there is a specific cohort of women who are being trained for IT jobs, who have women instructors, women job placement counselors, and women life skills coaches. And the life skills coaches are training around issues that women face, so issues like sexual harassment, or how to dress appropriately in the workplace, or, and it was mentioned earlier, how to get along in teams, those kinds of things. It's a non-gender lens organization that is doing very gender-specific work. And then in entrepreneurship, which you described beautifully, a program that we are investing in, but another program is Count Me In, which is a program for women veteran business owners. That is also one of the things that we're working on with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where we are counseling and training and then matching up with small business banker mentors over the course of a year, women-owned businesses that are owned by either vets or spouses of vets. And so one of those businesses is run by a former Army veteran who is in Houston and just came back from Afghanistan. And before she went in Afghanistan, she had invested in a skincare business. And she had invested in a skincare business because of this passion she had. As a child, she had some skin issues and was developing sensitive products, and that was always her passion. And she was deployed to Afghanistan, and she was fearful that, you know, this dream of hers would not be able to come true as a result of her deployment. And when she came back, is now being invested in through this Count Me In program, and is going back to and is bringing the skills that she learned in the service around teamwork and around looking out for one another and partnerships, and is now getting that very specific help from Count Me In and from Capital One in order to regrow her business. So that's a gender lens employment program, but there are lots of non-gender lens entrepreneurship programs as well.
So Marga, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned how there's this community of women, the support is so critical. It almost sounds like a social movement to kind of push entrepreneurship forward. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you're saying this, because when we started doing this work about 10 years ago, I think we kind of felt a little bit alone doing this job, and people were like, so how are you going to connect the dots between immigrants and women and entrepreneurship? And we take this very creative approach where we tell stories and we help integrate women through the power of their own stories using artistic expression, and people just could not get their mind around this model. So 10 years down the road, everybody loves to use the power of storytelling to empower communities and to bring women together and to tell stories and bring the community together. When we first moved in Alexandria, Virginia, I have to say that it was a little bit difficult for the community. So all those immigrants are coming here in this town, what's going to happen? So we opened up about 10 years ago a gallery and an art shop to tell stories. Again, the ultimate purpose was to empower women to earn, to have economic means, so they'll be self-sufficient, they'll be able to give back in their community. But we took another form of talking about that very difficult conversation, and everybody started clapping their hands. Everybody began to understand when we start telling stories about our grandparents and where we come from, nobody felt threatened anymore. It's like, yeah, I remember that. I had that in my family. Okay, so those are our neighbors. They're very nice people. 10 years down the road, we are seeing this movement where a lot of organizations are coming to us, wanting to partner with us, want to do what we do. How do you guys really empower those women? And so our model is very simple, similarly to what you were talking with the Count Me In program. So we started this 3-month entrepreneurship program, and we're looking particularly for women who are low income, isolated, experienced domestic violence, have been in shelter, sexual assault. Usually there's a challenge with those women. They're highly educated, skilled, but they're isolated. And because of that, there's a lot of mental health experience that goes in there. So those women have less chances to succeed, live alone to thrive, right? So coming into this program, you have our program trains 15 women at a time. So you have a cohort of peers that goes into the program with you. You have 3 months of working together. There's about 21 classes. We have about 20 speakers that we're bringing. Most of them are entrepreneurs and experts in the business industry. And we also work niche-oriented. So the industries that we train and we launch businesses are arts, food, microservices, and creative industry. So we make sure that the people that we bring as mentors, guest speakers, volunteers are people that have expertise in that area. So within this 3 months, you build a business plan, but you're actually launching your business. Aside of this, we have business labs. So we are training women on how to use social media. Big deal. I mean, when you're in your 50s and you came from Afghanistan, you may be an amazing painter, but you're not going to be able to use social media. 70% of the micro businesses rely on social media to get the word out there and build fans and friends and sell their products, right? So it's a lot of work that we are doing to put in systems in place for those women to understand how to plan their budget personally and in their business, how to set up their shop, whether it's online or offline. We set up volunteers on the side to meet one-on-one with women to address critical issues. Maybe their product was wonderful in Afghanistan, but here in the United States, the scarf needs to be changed a little bit and resized. So there's product design and development expertise. So little by little, as they accomplish it, as they move toward this 3-month program, they stand up, they do a business pitch. So they have about 3 minutes to pitch their business to a group of visiting investors. Those women provide feedback. We're looking to turn those investors into actually cash investing investors, not only judges of a business plan, but also investors. We just partner with Kiva, so we ensure that there is capital for startup businesses. So they come out, they need to, say they're bakers, they need to buy an oven. What is it, $5,000? We can raise it for you. We're using Kickstarter. I mean, a lot, when we started this work 10 years ago, we didn't have Kickstarter. Kiva was not in the DC Metro. Everything has changed because those opportunities exist. So what we do, we bring all of them together. So within 3 months, those women are ready to go. And when they complete with us, we continue to support them one-on-one and take them to market and connect them in the communities where they could do business. And I think this is where you build the social movement. Every woman, we have about 133 graduates. I look for one day to say we're 2.4 million Empowered Women International alum. We were only 133, but we're moving rapidly forward. We're training trainers now to teach our holistic entrepreneurship model across the region, and people are just thrilled to do more of this. So it is catching on. Every woman is on Facebook, is on Twitter, and tells the story, and her neighbors and friends and kids and schools want to get involved. So it is catching on. We're coming.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we have some time from the audience for questions. We hear you.
We hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. My name is Jacqueline Span. I'm the president of Education and Literacy Fund for Africa. And I wanted to go back to Renee's presentation when she said that they cannot get computers to the poor communities in Africa for a number of reasons. I attended a conference for the CSW Women's Conference and at the United Nations 2 years ago. We were in an auditorium, about 500 women. It was all nationalities, a lot of African women. And you might know that African women do 90% of the farming in Africa. So I just happened to mention to them, I didn't know they didn't know this, that they can bid by cell phone on farming and fishing. Well, they had no idea about this, and I can tell you about 200 women came running up to me to find out about this. Now, I brought that up because if you want them to use the internet, it may help if you introduce them to the cell phones and start from there. Not only that, many women in Africa and all over the world create baskets and everything else you can think of. And it would be wonderful if they could, once they're introduced to the internet and the cell phone, that they learn how to trade these beautiful things like the bags we have from Rwanda today. Learn how to trade that and make their own money. So I just mentioned that to you. You may want to take that in consideration where Intel could couple with a few cell phone companies, get the cell phones to the ladies, and figure out how to connect it and start from there.
So we actually, in our research, looked, that's a great question. We looked at all sorts of devices, not just computers. So we looked at the role of mobile phones, the role of laptops, tablets, the entire kind of what's called the compute continuum, all sorts of devices. And we actually looked to understand what women who access the internet, what types of benefits they derived from just using a mobile phone, just using a laptop, and those who used a variety of devices. And what was interesting, because oftentimes we think, yeah, mobile phones are ubiquitous, that's what everyone should use, and kind of there's a lot of emphasis on that right now. And what was interesting in the report was that we found that women who used multiple types of devices and the way those devices interact, not just a phone and not just a laptop, found more productive benefits in terms of income generation, educational opportunities, than just thinking about one device. So we were really looking at how the different devices interact. And there's, to your point about mobiles, though, there's a lot of innovation in that space right now, and a lot of fantastic programs. I just yesterday heard of an interesting program called Smart Woman, which is basically through the Foundation for Social Change, which basically is getting those communities of women to be able to sell their products in an online marketplace.
It's on in theory. I'm just
Yes,
there we go. I'm Andrea Eusine from DevX Impact. We're proud to be a media sponsor of this fantastic event. So the question is really, there's so much talk right now about the power of the private sector, sort of beyond corporate social responsibility, that even better than training someone is hiring someone. So are you satisfied with what corporations are actually doing in their core business models around these issues, or do you feel like it's still on the fringes? Thanks.
I couldn't hear, I'm sorry, you said, I couldn't hear the beginning of your comments. You said there's been a shift?
Carolyn, do you want to answer?
Yeah. So I can speak for Capital One, certainly, and I can speak for other companies that are within our networks. But what I would say is that at Capital One and in companies across the country, diversity is a major issue, and in the most positive ways. So from hiring to training and developing to promotions, et cetera, we are measuring everything that we do, both by gender and by diversity and other dimensions, and it matters to us a lot. We also have lots of supports in place company-wide for those kinds of things. So we have a women's network that is very, very active. I used to chair the women's network in the Mid-Atlantic region. I don't anymore, but I train for the Women's Network on networking, the art of networking, which, as we all know, is huge in identifying opportunity and in gaining new skills and in making new connections. And so I think in those ways, we are held pretty to very accountable for that growth. I think where there is a gap, and again, it's in the skills gap, and so I think it is incredibly important. There are so many open jobs here, sitting here in America, that we cannot fill because our workers don't have the skills, and many of those people are women. And as the jobs get, more and more high-paying, and the skill gap increases, it is particularly difficult. So we need to invest in training women and girls so that they can fill the jobs that companies have available, and can encourage diversity around.
I'm sorry, I have to add to this because it's more about the individual, and I'm going to talk on both sides. So I was with Sheryl Sandberg last night. She's creating a little buzz around her book, okay? She's out now on the cover of Time magazine. And the issue that we're focused on across the country, both for girls and for women, is that girls and women are still opting out of leadership opportunities. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from other women who, I'll tell you a very good example. So I knew a woman in Arizona who had born and raised in Arizona, grew up third generation in this city, had been on city council for at least 10 years, had mentored the last 3 mayors, and the current mayor was leaving to run for Congress, so the seat was open. And I was sitting with her over lunch, and I said, "You've got to do this. You've got to run for mayor." "I don't know. I don't know if I have enough experience." I'm like, "Wait a minute. You've been on council. You were born and raised in this city. Why don't you think you have the experience?" "Well, I've never been the mayor before." Long story short, I strong-armed her, and I said, "Listen, not only are you qualified, not only do you have the passion and commitment, it's your obligation to run for mayor, because there are a lot of girls sitting there watching this, and they've seen you behind the dais for 10 years. It is your opportunity to show what is possible." So not only did she run, she won, and she's now the chair, the big grand poobah of the National League of Cities and Towns. She is the top mayor in the country. Now, I'm a little passionate about this because we can go on and on talking about corporate structure and all this, but the reality is women need to own their strength. Women are, unfortunately, promoted based on experience. What we've seen in our research is men are promoted on their ability to succeed in the future. And part of this is because we need to feel we have a PhD in anything we're talking about. The reality is girls have the power now at the age of 10, 12, 15. You as women have the ability to do whatever you want to. And I'm also going to put it out because we're mostly women in the room. We need to all support other women.
Yep.
Okay? I will tell you because girls are watching. Girls are watching this, and they're watching how this is playing out from corporation to corporation, government to government, nonprofit to nonprofit. And if women aren't supporting other women and they're going back and pulling other women up, the girls are watching this. There's a reason bullying is epidemic in the United States right now. 160,000 kids stay home from school because they're getting peer pressure that they're not good enough. So the corporations can do all the great work of setting up diversity programs, setting up pipelines, but if women are not sponsoring other women into leadership roles, and men are not sponsoring women, not mentoring, sponsoring, then we're not going to see a breakthrough in the next generation.
And so what I would say to that is, we talk about an old boys network. I believe in an old girls network, and I learned about the phrase old girls network from Jan Verhage, who is the former lead of the Girl Scout Council in the Washington National Capital Area,
Yep.
which I am a proud member of. And then she went to Girl Scouts National, and she ran a program called Camp CEO, where powerful business women went to sleepaway camp and hiked to the bathroom in the middle of the night and slept in tents and had to wear earplugs from the other snoring women. And we worked side by side with girls, all kinds of girls from all kinds of backgrounds. And the point was to go out in the woods and just spend that core time forming that Old Girls Network, one young girl who lives in Anacostia had a school trip to France, and after spending time at Camp CEO, she wrote to all of the women who had been at camp that week, and she said, I'm going to France with my band, and I need money. And the checks came pouring in to this young girl in Anacostia who'd probably never dreamed of going to France before, and because she had an Old Girls Network. And so when we have the Women's Network in our company, there's the formal HR program, yes, and it is a wonderful thing. What happens behind that closed door is all about us. And so the support for one another, the information that we share, you know, we're the most connected people in the company because there is this trust and there is this behind the door, stays behind the door kind of conversation. And it is a really powerful force, but that's because of the social network and the social capital. And so we just have to build that wherever it is. And yeah, it happens through formal programs because I don't know that I would have done it if there wasn't a women's network.
Right.
And I don't know that I would have done it if there wasn't a camp CEO through Girl Scouts.
Right.
But it is what we each bring to it, and it's that passion that will get that next kid her next job.
And I'm just going to add.
Oh my, you clearly hit a good question here.
That's right.
Sorry, thank you.
You were talking about the world of the Girls Network. We're talking about a village. So it's
Right.
exactly the same concept. It's very interesting how all of us are working on economic opportunity, yet we're talking about, you know, the power of empowerment, personal empowerment, community empowerment, the village, the old network. We had just a similar experience. One of our clients yesterday wrote to us. She has an emergency situation. She cannot pay her bill, $1,600. It took us about 8 hours reaching out to our network and say, we have an emergency situation. She could do the following. She could sell her photography services. You can give her a loan where you can give a donation. Within a couple of hours, we raised $1,600 for this woman to actually pay her rent, get over this very difficult hurdle she had in her life with a 3-year-old child. She was not going to go outside in a cold weather, right? This is the power of a network. And in the end, I think this is what we are building here. We are rebuilding ourselves up from the ground, and from that ground where we have been put down for so long in so many ways, from the women in villages all the way in Rwanda to the countries like Romania, and here we are in the United States talking the same language. I have to tell you, when I came here 11 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, I landed in the most advanced country on earth. First woman that I'm meeting, victim of domestic violence. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we just passed legislation in my country. We just drafted legislation based on the legislation we have in this country. In this country, we have those problems that we haven't solved yet. So I was just lured into this thinking that we had resolved our women's issues here, and now we are a role model to everyone else out there, yet here I am 10 years trying to address one little thing, immigrant women, and I still can't quite change the equation. So it really takes a village, and I think it's a sustained process, and it's a long-term process, and it is a social movement. And it's just the beginning of it.
So we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to just hold off on, you're going to have to ask your question after. But I want to give the panelists each 30 seconds to a minute to kind of just a last thought that you want to get in there. Let's start with Carolyn.
Two more things. I think the power of network is huge. Social network, crowdfunding, Kiva, things like that give women incredible opportunities, but also the personal networks that I talked about. I think women's philanthropy should not be underestimated. Women are more than half of the wealth in this nation, and women's giving in very, very powerful ways matters. I'm a board member of the Washington Area Women's Foundation, and that is real significant power. And then the last thing I would say is women's financial empowerment as a movement. You know, women don't pay the bills, or maybe they pay the bills, but they don't make the economic decisions. Women, 1/5 of women say they don't feel confident making a big economic decision. I say, come on, folks. Like, if we don't learn about money, and if we don't feel comfortable with money and making big money decisions, then we can't be on par. And so that's another thing that my company is really passionate about is financial education, and those things will matter.
I would just say, think about, again, investing in girls. currently in the United States, of the billions of dollars that are given in philanthropic ways, only 7% go to women and girls. 7%. So think about that the next time you're looking for opportunities for your organizations to partner, whether it's Girl Scouts, Girls Inc., Boys and Girls Club, whatever you feel is the appropriate mechanism to support girls in this country, please do it for the future of our country. I also believe that we need to support each other as women to ensure that we step forward for the girls that are also coming behind us, support each other. I want to thank Annette from the UN, who I met recently and who's fabulous, and I asked her for help, and she said, absolutely, let me connect you. And that is just the power that women have of connecting each other to opportunities. Again, remember to reach back and pull forward.
And I think I would add, work on your passion. You know, we all have this drive in us for something better and greater, and I know we all have it. I am so convinced, and I think most people really struggle with, what is my calling? What is my passion? When does it happen? Where do you feel it? Do you feel it in a bag? Does it tingle here? You know, you must know what you stand for, because as soon as you know that, you will be able to open doors to possibility to everyone else out there, whether it happens in your school, in your community, it happens in your neighborhood, it happens at work. This is when you become open to mentor, you become open to inspire others, you become open to take a leadership stand on an issue. I think it begins, it's an internal transformation. It's not necessarily an external factor. Obviously, the external is very powerful, but when we are ready and we believe, everything else opens up and we transform, and so does everything else changes.
So our panelists have talked about a gap in multiple dimensions today, but just the tremendous opportunities and outcomes that exist when you have powerful leaders doing the work that you're doing. You know, one thing that to me is inspiring is this idea that this is a social movement and we all need to participate. And you know, my last point always is we got to engage men, and you know, that person over there. And so that this is not sidelined as a women's issue, but is integrated into an engagement among everyone. So thank you so much.